Welcome, everyone. This is our first webinar of the Canadian Latin American Archaeology Society, and we welcome everyone who are joining us today. We're very excited to get this webinar series started. My name is Dr. Diana Moreiras, and I will be the moderator of this the webinar today. Thank you all for joining us. I would like to let you know who we are. So we are a Canadian nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support, promote, and develop initiatives related to Latin American archaeological research. And who's in the CLAAS directors team? Myself as an executive director, and Dr. Cara Tremain is our events director. PhD student Matthew Longstaffe is our finance director. Dr. Alec McLellan is our research director. And PhD candidate Amadeo Sginolfi is our social media director. So today we will have 5 short 10-minute or so presentations by the board of directors and a few minutes for each speaker to answer any questions after they present. For our members on Zoom, if you are with us, please keep your audio muted, and after each presentation, you can write your questions on the Zoom chat. And for our Facebook live audience, we ask that you ask your questions on the comments of this video. So we would love everyone who is interested in Latin American archaeology to join our society. It's only 10 Canadian dollars to join every year, and you get access to our online and in-person events, the ability to submit essays and field experiences to our online journal called CLAAS Notes. If you are an undergraduate or graduate student, you can apply for Archaeological Field School and Conference Awards. You can register on our website, www.claas-canada.com. And also you can follow us on social media for archaeological news, updates, new initiatives, and events. Before we get started on this webinar, I would like to let you know our speakers for the following webinars in this series. So for webinar 2, we have Dr. Carrie Dennett from Red Deer College, who will be joining us on October 30th at 2 p.m. Central Time. For webinar 3, Dr. Elizabeth Paris from the University of Calgary will be joining us on November 12th at 2 p.m. CT. For webinar 4, Dr. Christina Joves from Simon Fraser University will be presenting on November 25th at 2 p.m. CT. And for webinar 5, we have Dr. Justin Jennings from the University of Toronto and the Royal Ontario Museum joining us to talk about his research on December 9th at 3 p.m. CT. So the way these webinars will be held will be the same way, live on Facebook. So you can all join us and tune in to watch them. We will also be uploading them shortly afterwards to our YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that as well. Very well, so now I will talk about my ongoing research. I was born and raised in Guadalajara, Mexico. And from an early age, I was very interested in Mesoamerican cultures. And so I pursued a career in archaeology at the University of British Columbia. I did my BA and MA in anthropology. And then I moved to the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, to pursue my PhD in bioarchaeology. My specialty focuses on Mesoamerican archaeology, bioarchaeology, and isotope geochemistry. So for my PhD project, I did a bioarchaeological study of Aztec residents and sacrificial victims at two Aztec temples, the Templo R of Tlatelolco and the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan, using stable carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen isotope analysis to uncover their dietary and residential patterns. I'm very, very privileged to be able to study these Mesoamerican skeletal collections, and it is a real honor to partake in the process of reconstructing their life histories. I presented my research proposal back in 2013 to the Templo Mayor museum director, and then once everything was approved, I traveled to Mexico City for my first sampling trip in the spring of 2014. I was able to sample individuals from Tlatelolco and from the Offering 48, composed of children from the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan. I began the sample preparation and analyses in the laboratory in the early 2015. And in the spring of 2016, I went to Mexico City for a second sampling trip. I was able to sample more individuals from the Templo Mayor offerings, as well as a group of Aztec residents from the contemporary post-classic site of San Cristobal at Ecatepec, which I will discuss in a few minutes. And I completed my PhD in the summer of 2019. So since finishing my PhD, I have been preparing my PhD chapters for publication. And besides doing this preparation of working on those publications, I am also currently working with my colleagues of the Templo Mayor project in a small isotopic study of two individuals, a child and a woman, who were recently excavated near the Templo Mayor. We are in the process of analyzing bone and teeth to reconstruct their early years of life and their last years of life as well, using stable carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, as well as strontium isotope ratios. These results will be compared to the other sacrificed individuals from the same temple context to continue to better understand the lives of these particular individuals who were once chosen for sacrifice in an Aztec ritual ceremony. I'm also contributing to a few other projects that are in their early stages. The first one is on the early presence of Theobroma cacao, or what we know as chocolate, in the Americas with my UBC colleagues, Drs. Blake, Cerrillo, Speller, and McLellan. And I am also working with Dr. Jeffrey McCafferty and his colleagues on investigating urbanization, resilience, and identity in the pre-Columbian site of Cholula in Puebla, Mexico. So one of my PhD chapters was recently published in Archaeological and Anthropological Sciences, and it's about the Aztec residents at San Cristobal Ecatepec, looking at their diets via carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis of their bone collagen. This was co-authored with my PhD co-supervisors, Dr. Moreiras and Longstaffe, and Garcia Chavez, who's our collaborator in Mexico. So the carbon and nitrogen isotope results suggest that the individuals enjoyed like a well-rounded diet composed primarily of C4 and CAM foods, such as maize, amaranth, and cacti, as well as residential animals, including insects, turkey, dog, and opossum, and some lacustrine foods from the Basin of Mexico lakes. For the adults, we found that the men and women consumed similar amounts of animal protein, but that the men may have consumed more C4 and CAM plants in the form of the alcoholic drink known as pulque in Spanish. For the subadults, we found that some children were breastfeeding up to the time of death between ages 2 and 4, while other children had been weaned between ages 2 and 3. This is the first systematic stable carbon and nitrogen isotope study of a group of Aztecs living by the Basin of Mexico lakes during the post-classic period. So one of the new projects that I'm embarking on is called Letting the Cats Out of the Bag, Taxonomic Identification of Felids from Offerings at the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan. So there have been several felids that were recovered from multiple offerings at the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan in all the excavations that have been carried out over the years within the Templo Mayor project. And some skeletal remains have been identified osteologically as puma, jaguar, lynx, and ocelot. But due to the lack of preservation of some skeletons, and since some of them were only placed partially, so some skeletal elements were represented in the offerings, it was not possible to identify some of these remains to the species level. So in this project, I will be collaborating with my Templo Mayor colleagues, Leonardo Lopez Luján and Israel Elizalde, as well as my UBC colleague, Camila Speller, to identify these felids by analyzing their bones through zooarchaeology mass spectrometry, or ZOOMS, and ancient DNA, which will help us determine the type of felids that were chosen by the Aztecs for their religious rituals in their most sacred temple. This has implications in relation to the capture, management, treatment, and eventual selection of these felids by the Aztecs. So the main goal of this project is to better understand the relationship between these felid species and the Aztecs during the late post-classic period. So that's it for me. So thank you for listening. And I think now Cara will join me, so that if you have any questions, please write them down and I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Cara.
Hopefully everyone can see me. I don't see myself yet on the Facebook feed, but I think we're a couple of seconds delayed. So hopefully everyone can see me. But yeah, maybe let's go to the introductory slide. Oh, here I am. Okay, so I can see myself now. So Diana's gonna be the one that's switching to our slides for us. So I'll just wait for that.
Okay.
Forward.
Yeah, do you see any questions? I don't see any questions.
No, I don't, not at the moment.
Okay, so if you have any questions, just write them down. Make sure you tell us who you want to answer the question, and we will get back to them later on. Okay, so I will switch the slide so you're ready to go, Cara. Welcome.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Cara Tremain. I'm the events director for CLAAS. So I'm also an instructor in Vancouver at Langara College at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. And if you'd like to follow my musings, mostly about antiquities and the Maya region, you can follow me on Twitter as well. Okay, so I guess we can get started on the next slide. Okay, so this is to give everyone a little bit of information about myself and my background. So I'm originally from England and I did my BA in archaeology at the Institute of Archaeology at University College London. And it was actually when I was revising for an exam, doing some reading about something, and I came across some really interesting information about Mesoamerica, and I decided that I should probably take a class to learn more. So I did, and from there I decided I wanted to try and do a field school. So I was very lucky that I managed to travel to Belize in 2006, and I worked at a site called Chawak Batobe, which is not too far from the border of Mexico, and it's a fairly small site. But while I was there, I got to do my undergraduate dissertation on the stone tools from the site. And we also did some tours of some of the really beautiful archaeological sites in the region. And I just fell in love with Mesoamerica and wanted to learn more. And then after I graduated, I spent a couple of years working in museums in London, and I also got to travel throughout Mexico and down into South America a little bit. And then I moved to Canada in 2009 for graduate school, and I've been here ever since, and I love it. And I was very lucky to study at Trent University with Paul Healy, and he specializes in the Maya region in Belize. And I got to work at an ancient Maya site there called Cacabiche, which isn't far from Lamanai, and Alec's going to be talking to us all about those two sites a little bit later on. And I worked with Dr. Helen Hames from Trent University, and I was working on the architecture of the two largest temples at the site. And you can see me in some of the looters' trenches at the site, because the site's been really, really heavily looted. And I was mapping the architecture and trying to figure out the construction sequences and talk about how old these temples are. And so I became really interested in not only the architecture, but also the looting process and seeing it firsthand. And then that got me really interested in trying to learn more about the antiquities networks. And so when I was doing my PhD at the University of Calgary, which I started in 2011, I decided I wanted to work with museum collections and look at ancient Maya ceramics. And most of those are from looted contexts. So it was nice transitioning from the beginning of the antiquities trade to basically the end of the antiquities trade and looking at the ceramics that end up in museum collections. And specifically, I was looking at the dress that's painted onto the ceramics. So I was really fortunate that I got to be really hands-on with some of these beautiful ceramics. And in the photographs, you see some of the work that I was doing at the Smithsonian Institution. They have a wonderful collection at the National Museum of the American Indian there. And I was also doing some work at the American Museum of Natural History. And they also have a really beautiful collection of Maya ceramics. And so that really fueled my interest even more into working with museum collections. And one of the other things I became interested in was the restoration of Maya ceramics and the industry that creates fakes and forgeries of them as well. So that's another side interest of mine. So as well as looking at the dress and the identity, I really got into looking at the manufacturing and restoration of these ceramics as well. So that takes us nicely into my research after my PhD, which is on this slide. Thanks, Diana. So my recent publication is The Market for Mesoamerica, which I co-edited with my colleague, Donna Yates. And if you don't know Donna Yates, she's an absolutely fantastic scholar. And she started her life as an archaeologist in South America. And now she works in a criminology department, and she specializes in art crime and looking at the antiquities trafficking network. So she really works closely with looking at policy and legislation. So her work is wonderful if you haven't already seen it. And actually on the cover of the book is one of the ceramics that I was lucky to work with at the Smithsonian. So it was nice to see the work kind of come round and be worked into this publication. And we were really happy to put this forward because not much work has been published recently on the antiquities trade of Mesoamerican artifacts. So really happy to work with lots of wonderful colleagues on this. So that's my most recent work. And then on the right, you see some photographs of my wonderful students at Langara College. And this was a museum studies class that I set up at the college. And I was very fortunate that the college supported this, and they let us actually bring on some objects that were being deaccessioned from a local museum here in BC. So now the class had the opportunity to work with a museum collection and help care for them and research them and learn about them. So that's another interest of mine, is integrating museum studies and hands-on learning into the classroom as well. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work with that. This is obviously pre-COVID. So I'm hoping that at some point in the future, we can get back into the classroom and do some hands-on work with these objects again. So then I'll talk also about the research that I'm currently working on, which is on my final slide. Perfect, thank you, Diana. So I have a couple of little things that are keeping me very busy at the moment. Probably the biggest project that I have that's going to be ongoing for a while is my work that's on the left, so Mesoamerican Museum collections in Canada. And so I realized that we actually have a pretty good collection of Mesoamerican objects here in Canada, but no one's ever really researched them in a lot of detail, and we don't really have any substantial information about what's out there. So I'm working on tracking essentially what we have in the country and eventually trying to make that available to researchers. And one of the things that I've found is that at least 4 provinces have institutions with collections, maybe as many as 7. There might be up to about 17 different institutions across the country that have objects. And there are upwards of 10,000 objects that we have, most of them from the Royal Ontario Museum, but there are some substantial collections elsewhere. So that's ongoing research I'm working on. But the most current part of that is something I have in press right now with a journal called Collections. And it's about work I've been doing here at the Museum of Vancouver. And they have a collection of Mesoamerican artifacts, mostly from Mexico, that dates all the way back to 1909. So it's an incredibly early collection, and it's earlier than most of the major museum collections in places like the United States, like the Met. It predates that, which is pretty impressive. And on the screen, you actually see some images from the collection. So the top photograph is the back and the front of an object that's most likely some kind of stamp from Mexico. And then underneath is actually the handwritten note from the archives. And this is what the donor gave with the objects. And so he's actually drawn a little illustration of this stamp, if you can see sort of towards the bottom left. And it actually turned out that this donor was a teenager at the time, and it dates to 1932. And it's pretty amazing that we still have this kind of information so we can talk about the provenance of the collection. So that particular study is all about the provenance and reconstructing the life history of these objects. And then in the middle is some work that I've been beginning. And this is a little snapshot from an archival newspaper. And I'm working on museum theft data in Canada. So we've got about 2,500 different museums and galleries and heritage institutions throughout Canada, but no one's done any kind of significant study on thefts of objects from these museums. So that's what I'm going to be working on, and it's going to be published as part of a crime and art volume through Springer at some point next year. And then finally, the images on the right, that's a project that I'm going to be working on with our president, Diana. We're very excited to start this, and it's part of a project called 100 Histories of 100 Objects. And it's about objects in the British Museum collection. And it's about trying to give a more critical narrative of these objects and a more up-to-date, accurate narrative of the objects as well. So the 2 objects we're going to talk about in particular are these 2. So it's a really beautiful stela from the site of Yaxchilan, and then a sculpture from the site of Copan as well. So as you can see, most of my research is predominantly based in museum collections nowadays. So hopefully we can continue to contribute to the discipline and learn more about these collections through time. So that's all I have. So we can move on to the next speaker, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end.
Great, thank you so much, Cara, for that presentation. So now we move on to our finance director, Matthew Longstaffe. Take it away, Matt.
Oh, hello, everybody. My name is Matt Longstaffe, and I'm just going to take a few moments to introduce myself before I tell you about my ongoing research activities. I am the finance director of CLAAS, but I am also a doctoral student at the University of Calgary, where Catherine Reese-Taylor is my supervisor. Next slide, please, Diana. So I graduated from the University of Western Ontario with a BA in anthropology in 2008. And then I went to Trent University, where I completed an MA in 2010. My MA research was focused at a site called Minanha, which is located in Western Belize, where I examined the political collapse of the Minanha city-state from the perspective of its non-royal residents living in and around the core of the site. Following my MA, I spent a number of years working for Western's Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, where I was initially hired as a data analyst, but then later I managed a small staff unit that conducted data analysis, program evaluation, quality assurance, and project management. I also spent a year as the manager of the Doctor of Medicine program there, and that was just prior to returning to graduate school. And although these roles at Schulich are not directly related to research, I raised this time I spent as a bean counter, which I think I have on my slide, for two reasons. The first is because I have some practical experience in institutional finance, which I think makes me a good fit for the role I have in CLAAS. And the second, I'll get to that when I talk about my research. Next slide, please. So while I have many research interests, I consider households to have always been central in all of my research activities. I see household archaeology as providing a lens through which we can get at the behavior and practices of people of all walks of life. The material record of household activities is highly comparative, not only within the Maya region, across space and time, but also cross-culturally. I also think that households can tell us a lot about other important areas of archaeological study, such as social organization of communities, political life, ritual and religion, and commerce and economics. While we can get at these topics through traditional archaeological methods, as is clear by the burgeoning focus on household archaeology over the last 30 years or so, one of the other things I'm interested in is how we can augment these types of traditional analyses with the application of techniques borrowed from the natural sciences, such as soil chemistry, sourcing of objects and artifacts, and the analysis of ecofacts such as macrobotanicals, as well as phytoliths and pollen. I see these types of proxies, when considered in conjunction with archaeological methodologies, giving us a more fine-grained and nuanced reconstruction of past lifeways. Finally, I'm interested in social institutions, specifically those social and economic institutions that structured and rationalized life in the past, and in particular, how households engaged with and participated as part of these. Quite broadly, I want to see if we can use some of the material indicators I just talked about to not just infer the presence of institutions as they existed in the past, but how they were enabled through actual behaviors, activities, and practices of households and their inhabitants. I conduct research at two archaeological sites in the Maya area. The first is Yaxno-Ca, located in Campeche, Mexico, and at a site called Alabama, which is in the far eastern part of the Maya world, located in the present-day Stan Creek district of Belize. I'm going to speak about my research at both of these sites quite broadly. Like many others doing field research abroad, my research program was interrupted this past summer by COVID-19. So at this point in time, rather than having new results to talk about, I have more questions than I do answers. Next slide, please. So Yaxno-Ca, which is located in the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve, is quite a large site situated approximately 25 kilometers northwest of the famous pre-classic period site of El Mirador. And it's on the periphery of what was the hegemonic classic period city-state of Calakmul, which is located about 20 kilometers to the northwest. Since 2011, Yaxno-Ca has been under investigation by the Proyecto Arqueológico Yaxno-Ca, which is directed by Catherine Rees-Taylor and Armando Hernandez Anaya. Among the first Maya urban centers, there is evidence of occupation at Yaxno-Ca from 900 BC through to the terminal classic period, and even possibly into the post-classic, with some evidence showing us some ceramics from around 880, 1450. The site had periods of punctuated fluorescence and decline, but overall it was occupied for a long period of time. The core of the site consists of 10 monumental platform complexes which are spread over 7 square kilometers, and these are believed to have served a combination of civic ceremonial and elite residential functions. Recent LIDAR has confirmed the presence of continuous settlement and unique agricultural features over the entire 42 kilometer square project area. So my research focuses primarily on the late classic, which was a period when Yaxno-Ca was experiencing quite a bit of population growth, which was concurrent with the expansion of the powerful Canuel dynasty, whose seat of power was at nearby Calakmul. In 2019, I began excavations at a house mound group situated adjacent to what project researchers have identified as a neighborhood marketplace, which is called the Sac Hall Marketplace. Next slide, please. This group-focused patio cluster consists of 3 patio groups that, in conjunction with the marketplace, we think formed a late classic neighborhood node. This is interesting because it suggests that integrative features were dispersed across the urban landscape at Yashno-Ka, not just centralized in those monumental precincts. The largest patio group is constructed on a platform that's approximately 2 meters in height and is bounded on all edges by several structures of varying height and features a large open patio space. The western exterior edge of this patio group overlooks the marketplace, and to the east of this largest group are 2 smaller L-shaped patio groups. My test excavations in 2019 targeted off-mound space between the largest group and the L-shaped groups, where we recovered artifacts that established household occupation coeval with the marketplace. So from these excavations, as well as the built environment, we know that this household was quite wealthy. We encountered an extraordinarily wide diversity of ceramic vessel types, and several that suggest a long history of conspicuous consumption. For example, the cacao bean and sized piece of pottery I have on my slide. But we don't actually know much about the people who lived here. What did they offer in return to be able to access these material goods and accrue the social capital reflected by the built form of the residence? Who were these people and what did they do? Did they accumulate wealth through the exchange of specialized or surplus goods? Or were they engaged in non-production related activities in the nearby marketplace, such as administering the marketplace itself? For example, maintaining facilities, facilitating trade, or collecting taxes. So my future research at this household hopes to explore these questions by examining their economic strategies in more detail, with particular emphasis on evaluating the extent to which the people who lived here were involved in the market institution next door, whether as administrators, as bean counters, as I alluded to before, or through other activities such as production for exchange. Next slide, please. So on the other side of the Maya world, my research focuses on the site of Alabama. This site is being investigated by the Stan Creek Regional Archaeology Project, which is directed by Megan Paramaki-Brown, Sean Morton, and Jill Jordan. Alabama gets its name from the former banana plantation located where the archaeological site is, and we do not know what the ancient Maya who lived here called this place. So, well, Yashno-Ka, which I just spoke about, is located in the central Maya lowlands, which is an area commonly brought to the front of mind when we think about the classic Maya, kings, monumental architecture, sculptures, large ornate monuments, and giant cities. Alabama could not be more different. To begin, the underlying geology is metamorphic and igneous, so the people who lived here did not have ready access to limestone, which is the predominant building material commonly associated with Maya architecture. Instead, the buildings here are constructed with an earth and clay fill and often faced with large shaped granite blocks. The site is located on an alluvial pocket, surrounded by the eastern foothills of the Maya Mountains on 3 sides. And the Wahaleaf Creek runs through the settlement, providing its past inhabitants with potable water and a direct connection to the Caribbean coast, which is located about 20 kilometers to the east. In terms of resources, the region features many diverse minerals, rare elsewhere, think granites and unique clays and clay minerals. And the deep alluvial soils and tropical forest cover provide an ideal growing environment for crops such as cacao, which is still growing in the area today. I have a photo of a cacao tree from just outside of Alabama I took in 2019. So for the most part, the site of Alabama developed quite rapidly at some point during the later part of the late Classic and into the Terminal Classic periods. Despite its small population, estimated at between 600 and 900 people, the site features many hallmarks of urban development, such as a ball court, large plazas, temple pyramids, and a causeway. Outside of the core, the site's settlement pattern is predominantly represented by single mounds, although a few multi-mound clusters have been identified. Data from the surface collection of materials from the settlement suggest many of these mounds are residences. Next slide, please. So one of the things about research at Alabama that interests me is that we have to throw away almost all of our assumptions about the Maya to work there. The architecture is radically different. There are no plaster floors, at least that we know of. We have next to no chert for tool making, but we do have obsidian. The settlement pattern is unique, and the resource base is very different than the sites of the central lowlands. The type of soil that we have at Alabama is incredibly acidic, which when coupled with the amount of rainfall the area gets, which is among the highest in the Maya area, this significantly impacts the preservation of the ceramics that we recover. Because of all of this, we actually know very little about the people who lived at this site. And one of the broad aims of my research is to better understand the ancient Maya of this area. Well, it's going to require some innovation in the use of different methodologies and techniques. Ultimately, I hope that by taking a whole house lot approach that combines archaeological methodology with multiple proxies, I can reconstruct the practices of households at the site to better understand the organization of this past community. So I think that resource development at Alabama was a key driver in its growth, and that socioeconomic institutions emerged to help support these activities, and integrated households into social, political, and economic networks, which operated at multiple scales. So in the coming field seasons, I plan to conduct excavations at a sample of residences located in the outlying settlement in pursuit of this hypothesis. So just to briefly give you a sense of what I've already done here is in 2019, I spent 2 months shovel test pitting, and these were nice shovel test pits, 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, approximately every 5 meters. Of the off-mound space of the largest and one of the only multi-mound clusters in the outlying settlement. We excavated over 250 test pits in an area of approximately 4,200 square meters, which included the plaza, space between and off the back and sides of mounds. While I initially planned to conduct shovel test pits at several different mounds over the field season, we encountered a large raised plaza made of river cobbles, boulders, and granite, which was totally unexpected given the other architecture at the site. Well, there were few artifacts in the core of the plaza itself. Directly underneath was an occupation horizon, which fortunately contains ceramics, obsidian, daub, which is a building material, other artifacts and tools, and at least a few, albeit very small, pieces of chert, which of course, finding all of this made digging through the core worthwhile. Although most of the ceramics were quite poorly preserved, some did turn out to be diagnostic, which allowed us to establish this household has connections of other regions, although the scope and scale of these remain to be understood, which I hope to get to in future years. We also encountered at least one and possibly two midden deposits and a few features that we hope to excavate further. And in each test pit, I've collected sediment samples from multiple levels, including the occupation horizon. And these are currently in storage, but hopefully in the next year or so, I'll be able to import them back to Canada and do some analyses. So that is what I'm up to for my research, and it's quite a bit, but I try to share it, and hopefully the next time I get to present to this group, we'll have more results than just questions. So thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you, Matt. Now we will move on to Dr. Alec McLellan, who will talk about his research. Welcome, Alec. Go ahead.
Oh, there we go, unmuted. Sorry about that. I'm Alec McLellan. I'm the CLAAS Research Director. I have a MA in Anthropology from Trent University in Peterborough, and I have my PhD from the University College London in the UK. I didn't start out in Mesoamerican archaeology, actually. My first excavation was at a site called Castile Henleys in Pembrokeshire, Wales, actually, with the University of Liverpool. I excavated on an Iron Age hill fort which is reconstructed as a tourist attraction right now. There's roundhouses. They actually filmed a show there, I think. After that, I moved into proper Mesoamerican studies, and I was first at Manana as well in West Central Belize with Trent University. While also doing my academic studies, I've worked in cultural resource management for the last 8 years. So I worked for pre-construct archaeology in London in the UK as an environmental technician. Did flotation, sediment sorting, analysis on Paleolithic, Roman, medieval, and post-medieval sites. The center photo right there is one time they let me out actually, and we did a small excavation at Westminster Abbey. It was nice. On the left there is with Archaeological Services Incorporated, which is a company based out of Ontario, which I've also worked at off and on for the last 6 or 7 years. This is just in Haldimand County, actually, which is known for some of the hardest clays in all of Ontario. It's a real treat to excavate. And on the right is me in Belize, where I do most of my research. And it's just a small excavation on a residential structure. Next slide, please. All right, so my main research focus is on a 10-kilometer corridor between two pre-Columbian Maya sites known as Lemani and Kakabich in northern Belize. This area has been researched for years, going back to the 70s and 80s as part of the ROM in Ontario. They excavated and consolidated a number of structures in the core of Lemani, and the Kakabich project, again, has been running since the early 2000s. But no one has actually ever looked outside of the cores of either of these sites. No one has really surveyed them or anything else. So that was one of my main goals starting my research in Mesoamerica, was to fill in a gap, a pretty large gap in a database that was already very robust. So Lemani specifically is of interest for a settlement pattern study because it's a site that is known to transition between the late classic and early post-classic periods, a time that witnessed the social and political upheaval of many sites in the pre-Columbian world. So one of the questions, or one of them, we had multiple questions going in, was what was the population peak of Lemani and the region between Lemani and Kakabich? Because in literature, there had been multiple assumptions based on the architecture in the core. Some people said, you know, the largest population was in 400 AD. Some people said 900 AD, but there wasn't any support, any evidence to support any of these ideas. So that was one of my goals. And another one of it was, why wasn't this area depopulated and abandoned like many other sites that we've seen in this area around this time period? And this research is all going to be published by British Archaeological Reports. I just finished the manuscript and sent it in a couple days ago. Okay, next slide, please. So here's the study area. You can see two communities, actually, the satellite image I got here, because there's an area called Shipyard, which is just northeast of Kakabich. And there's another place called Indian Creek, which is just south of Kakabich and southwest of Lemani. So the area is being developed very rapidly. They're removing jungle at an amazing speed and developing it into agriculture for corn to begin with, and then eventually it turns into cow pasture. So every season we went down, and we've done seven seasons, new areas would be opened up. And we developed a strong relationship with the local Mennonite communities who understand what we're doing and what we're looking for. And they would let us onto the fields to survey them before they would plant or do any kind of further development which might impact the archaeological record. It's the area between Kakabich and Lemani. They like to say that it's under siege in some aspects because the archaeological record is being disturbed and sometimes destroyed. So yeah, I've been doing this as part of the Kakabich Archaeological Research Project, which is run by Dr. Helen Haynes from Trent University, and also as part of the Lemani Research Project, which is run by Elizabeth Graham at University College London. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the first things we wanted to do was reanalyze the data from Lemony, because there had been so many excavations, but no one actually ever looked to see at how the site changed over time. How did it grow? What areas were occupied during other times when other ones are abandoned? And these kind of relationships. So we mapped out all the structures that had been excavated, and we created a map called a relative risk surface map, which is actually used in epidemiology to track the spread of viruses. I'm sure it's probably being used right now to track COVID, but it also works really well for population histories to see how populations change over time and where they're focused and where they're not focused. And some of the interesting things we found with Lemony is that in the early post-classic, the settlement became centered in the central precinct of the site, really focused compared to other periods where it was spread out up and down the settlement corridor. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is one of the settlements that's in between Kakhabich and Lemony called Koko-Chan. It's about 5 kilometers from both of them. It's right in between. And this is just one example, but we had settlements all up and down the corridor. And basically all of the structures were dated to either the terminal classic or the early post-classic period. Basically, there was a slow increase in population in the region over time, but then there was a large influx of populations in those periods. So one of the questions was, where are they coming from? Are they coming from somewhere? Is this a population boom that we're just seeing that's different? But there are a couple lines of evidence which make us think that there's migration into the area. So for example, there's a new ceramic technology that comes in. They start making their pottery differently. And then also the settlement pattern itself changes quite significantly. Normally on long-lived sites, you expect to find groups of structures that are focused together, and then they add a structure to that group. So they become 5, 6 structure complexes. But in the terminal and early post-classic period, we have single structures, just single structures, littered throughout the settlement pattern. So we think that, along with the ceramic evidence, is a sign that there was a massive influx of population into this area around that time. And that summarizes some of the work that I've done on my PhD. For future research, another thing we found was this community, Koko-Chan, just 5 kilometers from Lemony, actually has a large colonial population, a Spanish colonial population. So there were still Maya living in this area, which is interesting because at Lemony, the site experienced the policy of gathering residents from the surrounding communities and resettling them in newly established towns by the Spanish. So usually people expected the areas around those places to be completely depopulated, but it seems that there was still a substantial Maya population living here when the Spanish arrived and even after they enacted those policies. So for future research, we'd like to excavate some of these monumental structures to see if there were still people living there during the colonial period as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Alec, for that presentation. I don't see any questions, so I think we'll move on to our next speaker. And then if there's any questions, please write them down on the Facebook video, or just let us know that you have a question, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the presentations. So next we have Amadeus Ginolfi. He's our social media director, and he's currently a PhD candidate at the University of Western Ontario. So you can go ahead, Amadeo.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Diana. And yeah, as you said, I am a PhD student at Western University, and I am the CLAAS social media director. I did my BA and an MA in Italy at the University of Padova. And during my MA, I got in contact for the first time with the Andean world at a museum in Rome. In this museum, the Pigorini Museum, I did the stylistic analysis of ceramics that were coming from the site of Cajamarquilla, which is in the next to Lima, so on the Peruvian central coast. It's a very large site, and these ceramics have been sitting in the museum for 30 years, so it was a good opportunity to study these materials. Next slide, please. And thanks. From 2017, I've been doing research on the Peruvian north coast that you can see on this map. So on the left, you have a general view of the country, and on the right, zoomed in the areas, in the valleys where we worked. So I worked in this area along with my supervisor, Dr. Jean-François Miller, with other students from Western and other Canadian universities, and with Peruvian archaeologists. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we worked in the Moche, in the Viru, and in the Carabamba valleys, which are located in the La Libertad region, next to the city of Trujillo. In 2017, as you can see here on the left, we worked at a site called Cerro Arena in the Moche Valley. It's a large site located on a series of hilltops, as you can see from the image at the top. So it's an area that is easy to protect, to defend. And this was, as I said, a large site that could have hosted up to 4,000 people. And here we did drone surveys, we did geophysical surveys, as you can see from the image at the bottom. And we also did small excavations, and we did test pits to get charcoal samples that then we used for radiocarbon dating. And at the beginning of this year, my supervisor published an article showing that the site, despite being very large and hosting lots of people, the site has been occupied only for 25 years, more or less. So between 400 BC and 375 BC. So a very short period of time. And this site could have been a sort of urban experiment. And then, this experiment preceded other actual urban centers like the Gallinazo group, where we worked in 2018 and 19. You can see a picture on the right at the top where I'm flying a drone. So here we did drone survey. We did also here, we did the geophysical surveys and small excavations. This is another large site that could have hosted up to 14,000 people. So Cerro Arena, was occupied earlier than Huaca Gallinazo. So Cerro Arena was occupied by the Salinar culture, while Huaca Gallinazo was probably the capital city of the Viru state. And here we were in the Viru Valley. And in the Viru Valley, in the same 2 years, we collected charcoal samples from other Salinar sites, as you can see from the other picture on the right. And the idea is to compare the radiocarbon dates that we will obtain with the dates that we obtained from Cerro Arena, so to see if even here the occupation was short or if it was longer. So next slide. Thank you very much, Diana. Thanks. So about my PhD project, last year I was in Peru for about 6 months, and I did an archaeological survey, a pedestrian survey of the Carabamba Valley. This valley goes from 200 to 3,400 meters above sea level. This valley, it's located basically in between the coast and the highlands. It's it's basically a natural corridor that is connecting the coast to the highlands. This area is also moister than the coast. So here people were able to cultivate plants like coca. And the Carabamba River, along with the Huacapongo River, it's bringing water to the coastal Viru River. So for the coastal people, it was important to be in, let's say, good relationship with people living in this area to get water, so they were able to cultivate land even on the coast. So people were probably traveling through this land, but this area was also a frontier zone between groups that were living on the coast and groups that were living on the highlands. So yeah, next slide. So some of the results of, let's say, preliminary results of this project. So we identified, so collecting ceramics from the surface and also mapping the sites with the drone and also a portable GPS. So we were able to identify 47 sites in the valley. And so some of the results, as I said, we identified an early occupation during the period called Early Horizon. We didn't find that many ceramics from this period, but we identified 4 groups of petroglyphs. And these petroglyphs, as you can see on the picture, in the picture on the right, at the top, they were probably produced during the Early Horizon. And then we also found a group of large geoglyphs, as you can see here on the left, at the top of the slide. And then after this early occupation, the area was occupied by the Salinar culture that we see earlier. And even here, people started to occupy hilltops, and they built defensive walls around some of the sites. And later on, the valley was probably not directly controlled by the Viru and the Moche that were occupying the coast. So these people, because we didn't find that many corporate wares from these states, we didn't find corporate ware from the Viru state, but we found one Moche cemetery. So there was an higher influence from the coast during the second half of the first millennium AD. And in the second millennium AD, there was a strong influence from the coast, from the Chimu Empire. And about the highlands, of course, there was influence also from the highlands in this area, but it was a bit harder to work with ceramics coming from the islands because we don't have a well-defined ceramic seriation from the islands, so it wasn't that easy to differentiate between early highland ceramics and late highland ceramics. But here you have some examples. So on the left, at the top, you have 2 Salinar sherds. And at the bottom, on the left, you have a Moche sherd. And on the right, that's a Chimu sherd. And on the right, at the top, that's an early highlands sherd. And at the bottom, you have 2 late ceramic sherd. And on the right, that's a typical form that it's called colander. But these are only preliminary results. And as I said, there was influence from both the coast and the islands, but these people were probably middlemen, that they were in between states and empires that were located on the coast and polities that were located in the Carabamba Plateau and the Huamachuco area. And here, it's worth noting that we didn't find Inca ceramics, so the area could have been abandoned, or people, they were probably using the same kind of ceramics that they were using when the Chimu Empire was influencing this area. So this area, it's not very human friendly. Let's say there is not that much water. It's very steep, but people were living here, and they were exploiting their few resources that the land was offering them, and people are still doing the same. This area is still occupied. People are traveling through this natural corridor, and they are exploiting, let's say, different ecological niches. As I said, these are preliminary results. I'm planning to do spatial analysis on the data that I collected last year. So, for example, the viewshed from defensive sites, the least cost pathways between the coast and the islands or between key sites. And these are just some of the analyses that I would like to do. And then, of course, I will try to refine the ceramic seriation of the area. And in the future, I hope that I will be able to do excavations because this is there were not that many people that analyzed or studied this valley. So there's lots of things can be done here, and excavations will be very helpful in giving more information about the population of this area and who were the people that were living here. Next slide and final slide. And thanks to all the people that helped me during this project, and thanks to all the people that are listening to our webinar. That's it. Thanks, Diana.
Great. Thank you so much, Amadeo. Very interesting what you're researching. Hope it all comes together once you start doing more of the analyses.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I don't see any questions, but I would like to open up the floor to anyone who's listening and may have questions for either of us. So I'm going to stop sharing the slide, and if the speakers can all put on their cameras on so they can see us, and we can then answer any questions and maybe say a few words of final comments before we conclude the first webinar. So I think now everyone can see us. Great. So I have a comment for Amadeo. He said, it's Carrie Highland says, great talk, Amadeo. And Nathan Parrott says, thank you all for the wonderful presentations. Thank you. Thank you for listening, for joining us for our first webinar.
And I guess we can just mention again the next webinars that are coming up for people that join us a little bit late. So I don't know if you still have that slide from the beginning of the presentation that lists everyone. Maybe we can
share it.
Pull that up quickly, and then people that join us late can see the next one. So we've invited a group of researchers that we hope is representative of a broad range of research throughout Latin America, and everyone that's going to be speaking is based here in Canada. So here we go. So again, if you didn't already see this, these are our next webinars. So on October 30th at 2 p.m. Central Time, we have Dr. Carrie Dennett from Red Deer College, who's going to be talking to us about some wonderful research that she does based in Nicaragua and Costa Rica. And the reason it's in the middle of the day is we thought we might be able to replicate the idea of sort of a brown bag lunch series. So hopefully most of you can catch it either on your lunch break or if you're out east towards the end of the day. And of course, if not, we will be recording them all as well and eventually having them uploaded to YouTube. And then in November, we have 2 talks. Everything is spaced roughly about 2 weeks apart. So we'll have Dr. Elizabeth Paris from the University of Calgary talking about her research in Chiapas region in Mexico. And then we have Dr. Christina Giavas from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver talking about her research with animal remains, so zoo archaeology in the Caribbean. So that should be great, giving us a bit of summer weather when it's going to be very cold. And then finally, to wrap up at the beginning of December, so an early Christmas present, we have Dr. Justin Jennings from the University of Toronto, and he is also the curator at the Royal Ontario Museum, and he is going to be talking to us about his research in the Andes. So we're hoping that you can join us and tell your friends about these different talks as well. And we're hoping that you will enjoy it. And then if all goes well and the public actually really enjoy these webinars, then we will continue them for 2021. And we're hoping to actually extend the invitation to researchers in Latin America next year, so that us here in Canada can actually hear from people based in Latin America carrying out research there.
Excellent. Thanks, Cara, for the description. And yes, please join us. I think there will be really interesting webinars, and we're hoping to do more in the coming year. So stay tuned for those as well. And if you have any interests, you can always send us an email or send us a tweet or a message on Facebook. And we're happy to welcome ideas of what kind of research you would like to hear about, and we can try to make that happen. And I'll go back and just leave our website here, so you can all become members for just $10. It's not expensive when it comes to a professional society. And you get different benefits, as I mentioned at the beginning, and you get updates, and you will also just stay updated on what we're doing in the society. Especially if you enjoyed this first webinar, then we invite you to join us and join the rest of the webinars. If you join anytime during the fall, we will make sure you get the Zoom link and the passcode to access the webinars through Zoom, and then you can interact with the speakers and ask questions there as well. But we will always stream them through Facebook Live as well. So I don't see any questions.
I just wanted to read a comment from Facebook for those of you that know Heather McKillop. Heather's a wonderful researcher, and she's in Louisiana, and she says, "Greetings from Louisiana, great talks, and thanks for organizing this webinar. Amazing that Trent University still has such an impact in Mesoamerica. Hi to Cara and Matt, who I know, and to others. I joined, so thank you very much." Yay. Heather, for joining us all the way from Louisiana. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining.
And if you don't know Heather McKillop's work, she does amazing work, especially with 3D printed objects. So you check out her work. Maybe we can get her to post a link maybe to her research page, or we can share it on our page as well.
Excellent. Well, I don't know if any of you guys have any comments, final comments, or for our live audience.
Thank you for joining.
Great.
Yeah, thank you again.
Excellent. Well, this is now we conclude the first webinar. Please stay tuned for the next one. Mark it on your calendars on October 30th at 2 p.m. Central Time. And thank you all, and have a good night.